On behalf of the Council on Library and Information Resources and the Digital Library Federation, welcome to today's eResearch Peer Network and Mentoring Group Open House. My name is Rita Van Dynen, Curriculum and Research Strategist at CLEAR, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. Before we get started, there are just a few things I need to mention. First, you'll notice the chat window on the left of the screen. We will be stopping for a question and answer session at the end of the course logistics information. You can type your questions in the chat window at that time. You'll also notice in the chat window a link to a brief survey about you and your institution. Please take a few moments to complete the questions. We will be using this information for follow-up communications, as well as to send you the link to the recording. This session is being recorded, and as soon as the link is available, we will email it out to all participants. Today's webinar will conclude at 1:30 p.m. Eastern. If at any time during the webinar you experience technical difficulties, please send me a private chat so that we can troubleshoot together. To do so, mouse over my name and click on the private chat option. You may exit and re-enter the webinar at any time. Joining us today is eScience faculty member Chuck Humphrey. Chuck is the coordinator for Research Data Management Services at the University of Alberta Libraries. Over his career, he has worked on several regional, national, and international initiatives to increase access to data for teaching and research. This includes serving on Canadian data initiatives, such as the National Data Archive Consultation, the National Consultation on Access to Scientific Research Data, the Data Liberation Initiative, and the Canadian Digital Information Strategy. Also a part of the Peer Network faculty team is Nancy McGovern, Head of Curation and Preservation Services at MIT Libraries. Unfortunately, Nancy was not able to join us for today's session. We also have with us today 4 CLEAR DLF postdoctoral fellows in data curation for the sciences and social sciences. Scylla Ensberg is a postdoctoral fellow at UCLA. Scylla earned her PhD in cellular and molecular biology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. In her fellowship, she is working with faculty, graduate students, researchers, and library staff to implement the library's eScience strategy. She is part of a collaborative effort to develop the library's data services by serving as a representative of and a liaison to the scientific community. Ina Cooper is a fellow at Indiana University, where she also received her PhD in information science. Her fellowship is based with the Data to Insight Center and focuses on collaborative initiatives between the center and the Indiana University Libraries. These include cornerstone research projects of the center, such as the NSF-funded DataNet Seed Virtual Archive, the HathiTrust Research Center, and work in the area of socio-ecological informatics. Natsuko Nichols is currently a fellow at the University of Michigan, where she also earned her PhD in political science. During her fellowship, she is conducting research and assessment related to data curation services offered to researchers in the social sciences across the University of Michigan campus. Kendall Rourke's fellowship is at the University of Alberta. She received her PhD in anthropology from Temple University. In her fellowship, Kendall is working with professional staff within the university libraries, the University of Alberta Research Ethics Office, and the University of Alberta Health Law Institute to investigate data management practices, norms, policies, and infrastructure in health research that improve methods for sharing sensitive, private, or proprietary data. Today's open house webinar will cover the following. We will talk about what the Peer Network Group is about, why its establishment as a group is important, what you will receive by being a participant, and the objectives and outcomes of the overall experience. We'll also address what the course will contain and other logistical information. Chuck will end the session with a general discussion of the eScience Institute and eResearch. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Chuck Humphrey for a more detailed look at the peer network group. Chuck, whenever you are ready.
Thank you, Rita. In the time that I have to spend with you today, I'd like to provide you with some further context about this new program that we're calling the eResearch Peer Network and Mentoring Group. The early eScience Institute, which I'll shorten to just ESI, developed a program around preparing a strategic agenda, which I'll describe a bit more detail later in the presentation. The ESI was focused on institutional engagement in eScience, or you've probably heard it referred to as well as cyber infrastructure, or in Canada we often refer to it as research data management infrastructure. For the capstone event that was associated with ESI, we asked institutions to send teams composed of a university administrator, a library administrator, and a librarian or practitioner. At the conclusion of these events, we conducted evaluations, and one strong message that we heard repeatedly was a desire for practical next step guidance in implementing research data management services. Today, we're introducing you to a new program directed at providing personalized support for participants planning or implementing research data management services. The features of this program are a peer network of practitioners. We see supporting participants in the program in at least two primary ways. One is through a mentoring group that will provide one-on-one consulting assistance, and the other is through the building of a community of practice emerging out of this network of peers. We feel this approach, that is the peer network and mentoring, is important for several reasons. First, we're in the midst of the formation of a new specialization dedicated to the operation of data curation services. The dust hasn't settled on the titles for these new specializations yet. We hear these positions being described as data scientists, data curators, data librarians, data archivists, data managers, etc. Nevertheless, the new specialization is taking shape, and many of us are assuming the roles and responsibilities of such new positions. Because it is early days, credentials for this specialization have yet to be solidified. So where do you go for training? This isn't the first time in my career that I've faced specialization transition. When I started providing data library services on our campus in the 1980s, one couldn't find a formal program for credentials then either. I learned from my peers. Another reason we feel our approach is important is that research data management has gone from a project level activity to an institutional activity. Data are being acknowledged as digital assets of an institution, and institutions are beginning to face the fact that just as with their other assets, digital assets require stewardship and long-term care. This has resulted in the need for services and infrastructure to fulfill new mandates to curate and provide access to research data. To whom do you turn for ideas in developing these new services and infrastructure? Just as I turn to my peers for learning new skills and developing a knowledge base, I've turned to my peers for new ideas. Next, we start developing research data services and move from planning to implementing to maintaining. We often need some direction or, at a minimum, reassurance that we're on the right pathway. To whom do we turn for advice or support? Just as my peers have taught me and provided me with ideas, they've also provided me with proved to be a valuable sounding board for me, providing me with feedback and encouragement. So what are our goals and objectives with this program? The first is to support our peers in research data management and curation through the establishment of a peer network and a mentoring program. The objective is to provide personalized consultations. The next goal is to provide the organizational support for sharing knowledge and skills in this area. We envision fulfilling this goal through 3 methods: offering webinars on practical topics that have been identified by practitioners, supporting virtual meetings for sharing progress and receiving feedback from peers, providing both formal and informal gathering spaces for teams to work together. The third goal is to build a community of practice for our new specialization. An in-person event will be hosted on October 26th of this year for peer teams to bond, and will provide ongoing support for the emerging community of practice. We've packaged the following items in this course, and some of these I've already mentioned. Let me just say that we're around the webinars, we're looking at 5 to 6 webinars, but these are webinars that are intended to engage you in participation. That is, it's not just pushing information out to you, but we want to have dialogue through these webinars. We're going to organize these using a tool called Idea Scale, which I'll mention in a moment. I've already mentioned the in-person event, the personalized consultation that will be provided by our faculty and postdoctoral fellows. And then CLEAR and DLF are providing support. They're providing support through communication services, formal and informal, and will also assist in with the ongoing operations of a community of practice. This is a screenshot from the Idea Scale tool, and how we see these webinars taking shape is by identifying the priorities that our practitioners have. And toward this end, we've set up this Idea Scale community where you can identify the ideas you'd have regarding a webinar topic, and then voting on one another's ideas and suggestions. We encourage you to use this community space to help drive the conversation and to meet the needs of the peer network. This is the schedule that we have set up for dates of around the webinars and the in-person event. I want to include that these, at this point, these are tentative. They're subject to change, but we'll keep everyone in loop and consult with people about any time changes. But I also want to emphasize that the personalized consultations that will occur with our participants will be scheduled on demand. With this, I'll pass it back to Rita.
At this point in the webinar, we'll pause for some questions. Please use the chat window on the left-hand side of your screen to submit comments or questions. If you have a question for a particular postdoctoral fellow, please indicate this in your message. And it looks like we have Karen typing in a question, so we'll just sit and wait a few minutes for some questions to come in. Okay, here's a question. Is it true, this is from Catherine McNeil, is it true that we have to decide participation by the end of the month? Catherine, at this point, the registration for the peer network group is open through March 31st. And your question, Karen, Morgan Roth, yes, we will be recording every webinar. And Chuck, would you like to take Haley Mooney's question? Are there specific requirements for participants? For example, alumni of eScience Institute?
We're hoping to attract practitioners who are engaged in developing research data management services on their campus, and so we're not limiting this just to ESI alumni. It's open to anyone who finds themselves in the situation of dealing with all of the developments around research data management.
Are there any other questions from the audience? Any comments that you'd like to make at this point? Okay, at this time we will, Chuck will begin his discussion on e-science and e-research. I will just mention that if any of you are uncertain at this point whether or not you want to join the group, and you need a little more time to decide, we will follow up with you. You can just let us know. Okay,
so
Chuck, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Before concluding today's open house, I'd like to discuss a couple more topics that I hope will be of interest to you. Since we are in this transition between ESI's Strategic Agenda Program and the our new peer group and mentoring, peer network and mentoring group, I would like to make a few comments about the Strategic Agenda experience. Not all of you participating in today's open house will have necessarily participated in the ESI program. Therefore, I'd like to make a couple comments, general comments, to provide you with some background before commenting on how we see the strategic agenda and peer networking actually dovetailing. For those of you who did not participate in the ESI, you may have had parallel experiences that you can apply in your situation. The SAI was directed at the institutional level, which I've already mentioned. It was intended to get key individuals on campuses talking about the values around e-research or data-intensive research and research data management requirements. The strategic agenda consists of a set of guiding principles that each institution would articulate and be defined as a strategic direction in this area. In turn, these principles could be used in many ways. And this is one of the things that I don't think that initially people realize is that once you have this set of principles, you can interweave them into a number of uses. So, for example, they might be expressed as objectives in a strategic plan, or they could end up as text in job descriptions. They could appear as expectations in annual reviews. They might help set priorities in a budget. They could be actual wording used in policies. So having a set of agreed upon principles around e-research could be useful in a number of ways. Another important use of such guiding principles is in instructing implementation plans for research, data management, and curation services. And this is why I would like to spend a few minutes on this topic, that is the value that they have with implementation plans. This is a slide that shows the agenda of the ESI. The first two activities were to collect data about one's institution. The first involved completing a form that described important characteristics about one's institution related to e-research. These served as institutional profiles. The second exercise involved conducting structured interviews with individuals on campus in key administrative positions for whom e-research activities were under their leadership. The data from these two modules were then analyzed in a third module involving a SWOT analysis, strengths, weakness, opportunities, threats analysis. All of these materials were brought to a capstone event where peer institutions were in attendance. Through a series of activities at these events, institutional teams began to flesh out an outline for their strategic agenda. In some instances, teams left the capstone with a substantial part of their outline completed. Other teams left with a bare bones outline. Because the principles expressed in a strategic agenda can be useful in implementing services, we thought that the peer network and mentoring group might be used in addressing any leftover business from ESI. Our poll of some ESI institutions revealed that some had only part of their strategic agenda completed. Others had completed it but hadn't planned next steps. Others were done and had moved on to implementation. One way in which our new program might help is to provide feedback at these different points. We might be able to help, what might we do to help you finish your strategic agenda? If you finish your strategic agenda, how might we assist in preparing next steps? If you've already moved into implementation, how might we support you in determining options or choices around research data management and curation services? This leads me to the final point I'd like to make regarding how the peer network and mentoring group could be important to you and your institution. This is directly tied to the choices that we have to make when implementing research data management and curation services, which I will here refer to as research data management infrastructure. Infrastructure in this context has a specialized meaning. It isn't pipes, roads, or bridges. Rather, it's based on a paraphrasing of the definition that appears on this slide from Understanding Infrastructure. I'm using research data management infrastructure to refer to the expertise, services, and technology that we organize locally or globally to support research data across its life cycle. One way of representing this definition is revealed in this diagram. These dimensions represent a distribution of e-science cyber infrastructure solutions that take shape across a global, local, and social technological contexts. The authors of the report Understanding Infrastructure insist that building cyber infrastructure is not a case of selecting an endpoint along these dimensions, but one of choosing from the distribution of solutions that are available across these factors. A concrete example might help illustrate the application of this model. I visited Bryn Mawr University in July 2012, just as they were changing the way they were providing campus wireless services to guests. When I arrived on campus, I was given a sheet of paper containing the name of the campus wireless service, an account ID, and a password to log on. And a set of instructions were for different devices and operating systems. I was required to obtain a separate account for each device on which I wished to use their campus wireless service. This method to provide guests with wireless access to their campus network falls under the social local set of solutions in the model. The procedures were organized around human intervention, that is, having to find to speak with a person who could provide me with the information sheet, and around social norms requiring me to sign an agreement statement confirming my acceptance of the rules for using their wireless. The wireless technology, however, was typical industry standard Wi-Fi. On the second day of my visit, a new wireless service had been launched for guests on their campus, EduRoam. This is an international service that allows academic guests from member institutions of EduRoam to gain access to secure wireless networking while visiting another EduRoam campus. Because my home institution is an EduRoam member and can authenticate my credentials through this service, I simply open my wireless device, go to the list of available wireless services where I am, and if EduRoam is among them, I select it. The system behind the scene allows the local EduRoam host to verify my credentials with my home institution and to provide me with selective network services on their campus. For example, if the library has a license for a database that does not allow guest access, the local implementation of EduRoam can hide that database from my guest access. I no longer needed the accounts and the passwords that I had been issued the first day of my visit. This service method falls under the technology global set of solutions, My credentials are validated through my home institution using technology, allowing me to connect to wireless services at a member EduRoam campus without having to go through another person or having to obtain temporary authentication credentials. EduRoam has provided me with guest access easily to wireless services in the United States, in Germany, in Canada, and it is spread across the globe in 55 other nations. Truly is a global solution to providing guest access to secure wireless networking. While this example does not specifically address research data management curation, does illustrate the variety of options from which we have to choose in designing services. And these options are changing. The array of options at any one time is in flux. For example, as norms around privacy and confidentiality in today's digital world swing, the range of social options will expand or contract. As interconnectivity using trusted standards-based protocols shrinks the world, new global solutions become available. New local possibilities emerge as individual institutions develop policies, procedures, and guidelines around digital asset management. Finally, rapid changes in information technology are constantly resulting in new ways of doing things. How do you make choices about research data management infrastructure at your institution? Clearly, there are a number of factors that come into play. Your institution will have a technology solution within which you'll have to operate. You are constrained by available resources. The partnerships locally and wider afield will be a factor. And there are the ideas that you contribute. But where do you go for ideas? Do you have a safe group to float your ideas, to test your ideas? Where do you turn to for support in helping identify choices or options? Where do you go to get specialized training in research data management and curation? We believe through your participation in the eResearch Peer Network and Managing Group, well, you will find help and contribute to the growth of a community of practice. Turn it back to Rita now.
Thank you, Chuck, for the excellent overview of the Peer Network and Mentoring Group. If you're interested in joining this group, please visit the Peer Network website listed on your screen for registration information. As I mentioned earlier, registration is open through March 31st, but if you need more time to decide, just let us know. We'll be happy to work with you. The first webinar will take place on Wednesday, April 23rd at 1 p.m. Eastern. Make sure to visit the Idea Scale community that Chuck mentioned to submit and vote on ideas for content. And that link URL for that community is also listed on this slide. If you haven't completed the brief survey that was listed at the top of your chat window, please take a few minutes to do so now. And I will, I'm resubmitting the link in the chat window. And we do have some time, so if there are additional questions, we can go ahead and take those now. And just, okay. Okay, so we have a question from Catherine. Can you expand verbally upon what would be limited to 3 people and how? The cost of the peer network and mentoring group is based on 3 people per institution. For webinars, you can have more, certainly you can share the webinar content with peers in your institution. Also, for the in-person event, it would be limited to 3 people per institution. Does that answer your question? There are other communication resources that CLEAR and DLF can offer for you. There is already set up a CLEAR Connect space that you can become a member of, and that has a discussion forum. It has a library where documents can be uploaded and downloaded. We are also able to set up a listserv for you if interested as the group. Another thing we can do is to provide you space on the DLF website. Okay, Karen has a question. For the in-person event, are the 3 people to be the same makeup as was required for the eScience Institute? Librarian, VP, and researcher. Chuck, I'm going to let you take that question.
Karen, no, we aren't expecting that configuration. That was intended for campuses to begin the conversation within the campuses themselves. Our intention with this program is to work with practitioners, and so our expectation is that the 3 people who would attend the in-person event would be those who are engaged in rolling out services for research data management and curation.
Questions or comments? I did want to just come back to Catherine McNeil's question about being limited to 3 people. Typically, the webinar logins would be limited to 3 people because we do have a room capacity within Adobe Connect, but certainly once the webinars are recorded, you're free to share those. Okay, and we've got a question about the cost from Mary Molinaro. We arrived at the cost by creating a budget similar to that from the eScience Institute. We had to factor in internal resources, the expenses of those, as well as the in-person event and other costs. It looks like Rachel Frick is typing. Does that answer your question, Mary? Do you need more specifics? Yes, Rachel's correct. So to be clear, for the webinars, up to 3 logins per institution with unlimited people who could listen in. Thank you, Rachel. Yes, I understand, Mary. Just a note about the slide you're looking at. The very last bullet, additional questions, send to, and the email address. That email address is missing the L. It's Louisa Quasigras at clear.org. So it should be L Quasigras. So if you would add an L prior to that K in the email address. There, thank you, Louisa. She's posted it in the chat window. There is no registration fee for the in-person event. That is covered in your cost of participating. Other comments? Are there any other questions? Is there anything that any of our presenters would like to add? It looks like Rachel is typing. Yes, that's correct. The in-person event is the day, it's a half-day in-person event just prior to the DLF forum. This year's forum will be in Atlanta, Georgia in October 27th through 29th. That's correct. Again, the recording of today's session will be made available. It will be sent to all participants, and you will also be receiving some follow-up communications from us. We'd like to get some feedback from you and just keep in touch with your level of interest in the group. Are there other questions at this time? Okay, well, this concludes today's open house. On behalf of CLEAR and DLF, thank you for joining us, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.